Hello everybody and welcome to the TestRail to automate or not to automate webinar. I'm Simon Knight. I'm one of the product managers for TestRail. During this webinar, I'm going to try and speak to the issue of how you can approach your test automation strategy. Covering off the agenda items along the way. So the goals and the purpose of test automation, taking into account, your context, the way that your team is working and all of that kind of stuff. The main sort of body of the webinar is, what you should try and automate, and what you definitely shouldn't, what you should stick to a kind of manual testing approach for. And then I'll talk a little bit about how teams currently use TestRail for test automation, and finish up with some of the ways that we hope they'll use it in the future, based on some of the new features that we're working on the TestRail roadmap. So without further ado, why automate your testing? There's plenty of reasons why you might be thinking about starting to automate your testing, or why you might be thinking about expanding your existing automation capability if you already have one. The list here in no particular order illustrates most of the reasons as to why teams typically want to automate their testing. Reducing the amount of time taken to carry out the types of testing that they're seeking to automate is the kind of classic example. For example, the time taken to regression test your software can be reduced by several orders of magnitude by introducing some automation of those tests into your overall approach. It follows that you would then free up some of your testers to spend time on other, hopefully more valuable activities, such as exploratory testing, implementing further test automation scripts, or other value-adding activities. A side benefit of test automation is that you may also be able to reduce your overall tester headcount. And automated scripts also introduce a layer of rigor to your testing, in the sense that exactly the same actions are being performed by your scripts every time you run them. Hopefully, the reduced amount of time required to test your software using test automation is going to result in bugs or issues being identified earlier on in your development lifecycle. And another important and often overlooked benefit of test automation is that what you're actually doing is encoding business knowledge into your testing scripts themselves, particularly and explicitly in the case of kind of Gherkin style behavior driven development scenarios, where you're looking to capture behavior as in the ideal world as executable specifications, but also for all of the test automation layers that you implement, whether those are at the unit or the integration level, or even whether you're more focused on the UI, or even if you're doing performance testing. The scripts that you produce tell you how your application is supposed to work, which can obviously be a very valuable asset, particularly when you're kind of handing over that work potentially to other people who don't have the same level of knowledge as maybe the person who originally wrote the test scripts does. And there's a number of other benefits as well. Additional insights can be identified over the course of time as your automated tests are being executed. And depending on the type of tests, it's quite possible that your developers may want to run those themselves so that they can check for issues in their code before they even commit it to the repository. So all of these benefits should ideally serve the broader business context, which is likely to fall into one of these bullet points here. Decreased effort and decreased costs that are associated with that effort of developing and testing and releasing code. Improving your speed to market by obviously reducing the amount of manual testing time you're having to spend, and ideally increased quality and confidence in your development activities as you implement and run your automated tests, and hopefully see those tests are passing. So probably one of the things that you're going to want to do before you implement an automation approach, though, and keep thinking about throughout the development life cycle of your automated tests, is how it fits into your specific context, how your team is working, what the sort of organizational expectations are and such like, and what the strategic goals for your test automation actually are for your team and for your product. So there's quite a few ways that you could start to think about this. And we've got quite a number of articles that you can go through and read about this kind of stuff on our TestRail blog. So for example, this list here is from Raj Subramania's article, 3 steps to set up an automation strategy. And I'm not going to run through those in detail. They're just here, and you can refer to these later if you want to. Another good way of thinking about how to strategize your test automation approach, and this one has a kind of handy mnemonic, is the crawl approach, which again, you can go and look at this on our blog if you want to. It was created by John Robinson. We worked with him a few years ago, and he wrote this for us. So the mnemonic, when you break it down, is this. C is for complexity. So when you start to think about implementing a test automation strategy, you need to think about how difficult the project is going to be in advance, and start to kind of brainstorm ideas about the sort of problems that you're looking to solve and how you're going to address those. R is for return on investment. What exactly are you actually hoping to gain from your automation stack over the course of its life cycle in the short, medium, and longer term? A is for adaptability. So something worth thinking about when you're sort of initially strategizing your approach is what tools are you planning on using, and if you need to kind of tweak or adjust your automation tool set or your approach based on what you've learned as you've gone along, are you going to be able to? Ideally, you want to try and avoid being locked into a particular approach if you can, particularly if you discover that approach isn't working for you, and especially if it involves buying some proprietary tooling, some tooling that's expensive and you don't want to pay for in the long term if it's not working for you. So it's worth thinking through some of those kind of issues in advance. W is for worth. Is your automation actually adding value? An easy question to ask, but sometimes a bit more of a painful question to answer. I think it's worth asking that question at the outset and regularly as you start to get into the implementation of your automated testing to make sure that you are on track with the goals that you've identified and want to accomplish with your automated solution. And L is for longevity. So what is the expected lifespan of your test automation? And again, this is worth thinking about because you may only need something in the short term, in which case, the code to some extent can just be thrown away. And you don't need to think about the long-term maintainability aspects of writing code that is more suitable for the long term and is going to see you through many iterations of your product over the course of time. So I think that's a pretty handy mnemonic. It's worth keeping those points in mind as you start to think about how to approach your test automation. And again, another great resource that we've put together but never previously shared is this test automation checklist, which again is based on a blog post which you can find on our blog by Nishi Grover Garg, which basically just kind of walks you through a lot of these data points that are through the decisions that you want to factor into your test automation approach. And if you go through that spreadsheet and fill it out, then it will give you a score at the end, which you can use to help steer your decision making. So I'll share a link for that at the end of the webinar in case you want to take a look. So assuming that you've gone through some kind of strategic assessment, either using those approaches that I've talked about or some other approach, and you've figured out whether and how you're going to start to implement an automation strategy, then quite soon you're actually going to get into the weeds of deciding what tests you want to start writing some code for. So in my article, to automate or not to automate, which is where this a lot of this webinar content is kind of taken from, I identified a number of considerations for how you might want to handle this. So we're going to walk through those. So while you're coding, the most obvious place to start developing your automated testing capability is while the product code is being written in the first place. Retrofitting unit tests to legacy code is challenging. It's a problem. And if you're in a situation where lots of code already exists, then you may make a decision to kind of skip this step in favor of tests at some other layer of your technology stack, the API, for example. But where it is possible to do so, then adding unit tests to your testing strategy is going to be quite valuable over the long term. It's going to provide your team with vastly increased confidence anytime they need to add or change code. And this is something that generally sits firmly in the developer camp. So if they're on board with the idea of doing this, then following a test-driven approach, I think is pretty much the holy grail of this level of testing. With a TDD approach, your developers are going to write their tests before the code is produced, helping to guide the design of that code and the development of the overall solution. And it's going to give you the best possible degree of unit test coverage in the process, which, you know, I think is a big win for everybody. So sometimes unit testing isn't going to be feasible or appropriate, though, depending on the choices that have been made, you know, throughout the history of your product, the technology and the architectural choices. So in my view, the next best thing is to follow more of an integration testing based approach, focusing on the areas of your project with the highest levels of integration risk. How you actually approach integration testing is obviously going to depend on how your product has been put together in the first place. If it's kind of your classic 3-tier database, business logic, user interface sort of arrangement, then, you know, probably the main area of risk is going to be integration between the business logic and the database layer. And you're going to want to ensure that, you know, the correct data is stored or retrieved from your database when specific transactions are being performed, for example. A lot of teams are using microservices models to develop their applications, where the various components of the system are implemented as individual services. Obviously, developing a product in this way makes it ideally more scalable. It means those services can be instantiated and deployed as needed across your infrastructure. And from an integration perspective, though, it means you need to test the integrations between all of those microservices as part of your automation strategy. And that can get quite complicated quite quickly because, you know, there can be lots of those interactions, right? And that's where something like contract testing can start to become useful. Focusing on high priority areas. So when you're starting out with your automation strategy, I think you should work from a set of prioritized tests. My thinking behind this is pretty straightforward. If you're crunched for time at some point in the future, which, you know, in my experience of working on many projects is, you know, more or less always the case. If you have prioritized your tests, then you can start with the highest priority tests and work down your list of priorities as you have time to do so. Really straightforward concept, but the amount of teams I've seen that haven't prioritized their tests over the years is, you know, larger than I would like it to be. And I think it's the same thing for test automation. If you don't have any automated tests yet, then start by automating your highest priority manual tests. Don't do any other automation until you've implemented all of your highest priority tests. And in my view, this kind of follows along with Pareto's sort of 20 rule, because if you have implemented some or all of your highest priority tests, then, you know, probably you've only implemented automation across quite a small number of your tests, let's say 20%. But that 20% is probably going to give you 80% of the confidence that you need when it comes to making release decisions based on those automation results, right? So, you know, go through the exercise of prioritizing your tests and then use that prioritization to figure out which tests you should automate first. So look for product risk. And following on from the previous point, you might well ask, how should I prioritize my tests? And again, I think the answer is fairly simple, at least to answer, maybe not quite so simple to actually work through. Look for the areas of greatest risk. So I think there's two main kinds of risks that we want to consider when implementing an automated testing strategy: product risk and regression risk. Product risk is potentially contentious in terms of test automation, since not all product risks are easy to test for, which means they also won't be easy to automate. In my experience, product risk relates to 3 or 4 key areas, the ones identified here. Usability: the solution needs to be, ideally a good experience so that the customer or the potential customer wants to keep using the product. It needs to be fit for purpose. The solution should solve the problem for which it was designed. Reliability: the product needs to have the customer's confidence, particularly as it relates to things like security and performance, or accessibility and availability. And business risk: the product needs to meet the requirements of the organization that created it. Usually this means it needs to generate revenue or turn a profit. As you might imagine, it can be quite difficult, well, virtually impossible, to write an automated test that gives you an answer to one of those questions. More likely is that you're going to have a number of tests which are designed to address some facets of those various areas, so that a stakeholder, a product manager, or some other business stakeholder is able to look at the results of those tests and get a feel for whether or not the product is usable or reliable, for example, in the case of reliability. The other area of risk, which is very important, is regression risk. The risk that something which was working before has now been broken or doesn't quite work in the same way. And again, this is where encoding business knowledge can be quite valuable, because things can change over time and your automation tests will pick up those behaviors, and they may not actually be regressions, they might just be changes, but your automated tests will tell you about them. And I mean, regression testing is kind of a classic win for an automated approach to your testing, since by the time you come to actually automate a regression test, the functionality should be very well understood, and as a result, pretty ripe for automation. So catching regression failures by way of test automation is kind of an easy win, low-hanging fruit. I've mentioned performance once or twice. Performance is also a product risk. It's a business risk as well. Once you've got some automated tests in place, it's relatively easy to monitor the performance of your product, simply by measuring how long it's taking to run your tests over time. You can pick a single test and monitor that to see how long that test is taking, or you can monitor how long it's taking to run all of your tests, or a subsection of your tests. I think it requires a baseline of some sort, a set of tests which is going to remain static in terms of scope. But once you've got that, then as I say, you should be able to take the individual and or aggregated time for executing those tests and figure out from it whether the performance of your application is improving, staying the same, or getting worse. and you can then take the necessary actions as a result. So having a baseline set of tests kind of feeds into this next point as well, which is that I think it can be really helpful to have suites of automated tests which are executed for specific purposes. One of the traps that I've seen teams fall into is that they have a huge number of automated tests which can take a couple of hours or more to execute, and they need to execute all of those tests in order to determine whether it's okay to release their product. I think sometimes you're going to have a huge number of tests. I mean, some of our customers have hundreds of thousands of tests, and they are going to take a long time to run, and there may be no way around that. You have to run all of those tests for reasons that you've determined within your team, and that's fine. But ideally, you don't want to end up in a situation where it takes a couple of hours to run those tests, and then find out that because a single high priority test has failed, the whole execution needs to be run once whatever the issue has been fixed. And this kind of goes back to the prioritization point as well, right? So if you prioritize your test cases, then you should be able to split up your test automation jobs into a series of executions that get progressively more advanced as you need them to, a pipeline. So you might have your tests broken down into a smoke test job, an acceptance test job, a regression test job, and each of those jobs has more tests in it. So the smoke test job might have 10 tests in it of the very highest priority, and if that job passes, then you run the acceptance test job, and if that passes, then you run the regression test job. And by the time you've run those, you're in a pretty good place in terms of making a release decision. And you could also have another job that runs all of your tests if that's what you need. You could run that nightly, or you could run it as part of your pipeline, but you're sort of mitigating the risk of one test falling over from a suite of maybe a couple of thousand, and adding time to your release cycles as a result of having to rerun all of those tests because of a small number of failures. So obviously the specifics and therefore your mileage with this approach is going to vary a little bit, but hopefully you get the idea. And the main point is split up your automation jobs so that they increase in scope and duration over time. Don't start with your longest running tests, finish with them. Front load the risk of your automation failing by running the most important tests first, so that you can provide feedback faster in the event that something is wrong. So the goal of your test automation efforts should be to minimize the amount of manual testing effort required to ship your releases. And that doesn't mean that you're going to eliminate manual testing effort entirely in most cases. And in my opinion, I don't think you should be trying to eliminate manual testing entirely. I think what you should be trying to do is redirect the efforts of your testers to higher value activities by releasing them from lower value activities by automating those activities. So there's a few ways that that you can think about this. I think again, what you don't want to be in is a situation where you want to carry out a release, but you need weeks of manual feature and regression testing in order to do so. Those are exactly the kind of activities that your test automation should be replacing. And you want to try not to fall into the trap of attempting to automate tests which are going to slow down your releases, right? So there are tests that you want to automate, and there are tests that you probably don't, because they're, you know, they take too long, or they're likely to be flaky, or, you know, they rely on, they have dependencies on things that might not be totally under your control. And, you know, any of those problems are going to slow down and potentially reduce confidence in your automated testing and your testing results. So there's a few things you should try not to do. Next slide. So trying to automate tests for features still in the early stages of development is, you know, kind of a recipe for frustration, because, you know, they might change. You're much better off waiting until you've got something that's stable to test against. And, you know, often that means that that feature is going to have been through several iterations of testing and fixing before it's actually ready for an automated test. Low priority features, you know, I've already talked about prioritization quite a bit. Don't waste your time trying to automate low value features. Focus on bigger wins. And if you're not sure whether a feature is high or low priority, you know, go and check in with your product owner or product manager. They will almost certainly have an answer for you. Tests that don't have well-defined outcomes. If you don't know what the outcome of a test is or should be, you probably shouldn't be automating it. There are some tests without well-defined outcomes that you might that might be automated to some extent. Performance tests, for example. But for functional tests, you should definitely know the outcome, and that outcome should be binary, pass, fail in nature. Anything else is probably going to lead to problems. Tests which cannot be fully automated. If your test can only be partially automated and needs some kind of manual intervention to finish, then again, this isn't a good candidate for inclusion in your automated test runs. By all means, use it as a tool or as some kind of script to help you with your testing, but, you know, probably don't include it in your automated build jobs. So how does TestRail fit into this picture? Well, we have customers who are doing all kinds of testing with TestRail, from landings on Mars to microchips to cloud infrastructure, and to all kinds of other development, DevOps, and testing software. And for the vast majority of those customers, there is some blend of both automated and manual testing. Now you can see here some results from our customer survey that we did, well, our most recent customer survey. And, you know, we can see the kind of percentages that our customers are aiming for in terms of how many tests they're wanting to automate. And we can also see that percentage hasn't changed a huge amount over the course of time as we've been doing those surveys. Getting all the way to 100% automation is, you know, a great and worthy goal to have, but I think it's very difficult to accomplish it in practice. And in my opinion, there will nearly always be at least some elements of your testing that you're going to want to carry out manually. And for this reason, there is often that blend of approaches. And TestRail kind of helps you to accomplish this by providing you with the capability to organize all of your tests into runs, plans, milestones, giving you that kind of testing repository that you can use for all of your automated testing and all of your manual testing. In addition to splitting out your manual and automation tests by organizing them into separate runs, TestRail also gives you, a bunch of other tools that you can work with as well, so that you can add information to your tests that's going to allow you to kind of supplement that blended approach to your testing by, adding things like the type of testing that's being carried out, adding prioritization, as I've waxed lyrical about already, and supplementing your tests with, additional custom fields if necessary, so that you can provide more information about the target of your testing, like, the version of code that you were testing against, or the component, or, whatever other information you need to add to those tests. So again, this slide has some results from our survey. And as you can see quite clearly from the slide, I hope, our customers use all kinds of tools for their automated testing, from proprietary to open source, and in lots of cases homegrown, although those aren't listed here. They'd probably fit into the other category on the far right there. And the thing that all of those tools have in common at present is that they use the TestRail API to facilitate the integration between the test automation stack and TestRail. Getting tests from TestRail, so identifying what tests need to be executed in the first place, and pushing the results of those tests back into TestRail. So I'm not going to drill down much into the API, well, at all really, into the API in this webinar. We cover the TestRail API in lots of detail in another webinar, which you can go and take a look at on the webinars page on our site. And my colleague John Reynolds does an excellent job of walking through that in that webinar through the TestRail API. Similarly, on the continuous integration front, as you'd probably expect, a lot of our customers use CI for various purposes, including helping them to execute their automated tests at various points during their development cycles. Again, grabbing testing information from TestRail and pushing results back into TestRail using the TestRail API, and so that those results can more easily be visualized, updated, shared, reported on by all of the people that need that information. Reporting all of your information into automation into TestRail directly alongside any manual testing plans and results, I think really helps teams to build up a clear picture of the quality of their products at each stage of development, and obviously over the course of time can prove to be an extremely rich source of information when it comes to tracking all of that data. Just drawing a line under the CI stuff, again, if you're interested in following the CI thread a little bit further, then we've got a previous webinar for that as well, and you can go and find that on our webinars page on the site. So I said at the beginning, and I'm pretty close to wrapping up here, but as I said at the beginning, I wanted to kind of close out by talking about some of the things on our TestRail roadmap that we hope and expect will go some way towards improving the lives of teams that are implementing automated testing solutions alongside of TestRail. So there's a bullet list of things here that we've got coming up, not necessarily in that order, although mostly in that order. So I'm just going to walk through those real quickly, give you kind of a whistle-stop tour of those roadmap items. So reporting part 1, we're going to be introducing a bunch of chart improvements throughout TestRail with the ability to drill down from the charts directly to the data points those charts are reporting on. So for example, if you go onto a project page and you can see your activity from your activity chart that there was a number of failed tests in a project on a given day, you will be able to click on that chart data point and drill down directly through those tests. So it's going to allow you to get to your testing information much more quickly and much more easily. In that release, we're also going to have a few other reporting tweaks and adjustments as well, and also some better bulk deletion capabilities for runs, plans, and milestones. So just some quality of life improvements in there as well. We are going to be implementing webhooks into TestRail. Webhooks work probably as you'd imagine. So you're going to be able to define payloads in TestRail, and you're going to be able to specify what endpoint you want those payloads to be sent to based on event changes in TestRail. So again, by way of an example, you could set up a webhook that triggers when a run is created in your project and sends a payload with the details of the tests in that run to your specified endpoint. So that could be, you know, your automation stack directly. It could be your continuous integration server, or it could be, you know, something else. Slack, for example. In our enterprise test case version control and review release, we're going to be introducing version control on your test cases. So the ability to view and compare changes side by side, revert those changes if needed. And we're going to be adding review capabilities, including commenting, assignment, and test case review statuses. So lots of exciting things there. In our enterprise test data and parameterization project, we're going to be introducing the capability to create testing variables and data sets containing values for the variables that you've created. And you're going to be able to use those in test cases and test runs. You're going to be able to manage all of those things, insert variables into your test cases and have those populated at runtime. You're also going to be able to generate test runs based on the data sets that you've created. So lots of exciting stuff there. Improved search, not a huge amount to say about that really. It does what it says on the tin. Improved searching throughout TestRail, along with much better search controls and you know, capabilities around search generally. In our reporting part 2 project, along with WYSIWYG editing, we are looking to continue building on the chart improvements with capabilities to start selecting what data is actually displayed in those charts in the first place. And we're going to give you some tools to extract that data from them. So starting to build out some more customized reporting using the TestRail charts. And we also plan on implementing WYSIWYG style editing across TestRail in parallel with that. API v3, this is, you know, still a little way off. It's still being discussed, but basically we're planning to either move to kind of a true REST based implementation of the API, or possibly a GraphQL implementation of it. We're still kind of thinking that through though. The TestRail CLI tool, so we're looking at building out some kind of client-side agent which helps you to kind of streamline the process of synchronizing all of your automated tests and results between your automation stack and TestRail. Excuse me. And test automation plugins and improvements. Again, this is still kind of being discussed, but we're expecting to implement some more endpoints, which are going to do things like pass your automation results for you by passing in your JUnit results or whatever format your automation results are in. And we're also looking at a number of other potential test automation improvements and improvements generally, which brings me to my next point. We need you. We want your help. We want to talk to customers about their current testing situation so that we can better understand what your pain points are, and so that we can deliver solutions that speak to the pains that you're having and help you to kind of solve some of the problems in terms of your testing and your test automation and reporting and all of the other things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis that we want TestRail to help you with. So we've got a number of initiatives that are going on to try and facilitate that. They're listed here. We're looking for beta testers to help us test new releases before they go out to everybody. We're looking for user testers to help us test out plans and designs for new features before we even implement them. And more generally, we're looking for people that we can talk to just to kind of understand better what we should be building into TestRail that's going to support all of you guys on this call and all of our customers in the future. So we need you. We want your help. And if you're interested in engaging with us on any of these initiatives, whether that's beta testing, user testing, or just having a conversation with the product team, then please do reach out, send us an email via contact@gerup.com and just mention my name in there, and that'll get to me, and we can make sure we take the appropriate action. So that's pretty much it. In which case, thanks everybody for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. And please remember, if you're interested in any of the initiatives that we mentioned, please do reach out via the contact@gerup.com email address. Thank you everybody for joining. See you at the next one.